When I joined the IRA, I never realized that I would get so close that I would see the consequences of my actions and to see the wreckage of lives and destruction that I was to cause over that period of years. I was an effective IRA man. I brought with others the war to the fore in that particular area like it had never been done before. And we were a military organization in that area, second to none. We were effective, deadly killers. Force was the only thing that the British would respect. And every killing was a bonus. Every military action was an act of defiance against the British and was a reminder that we were there. And I believed that that was the only thing that the British would respond to.
The border between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic. All the security failed to stop IRA men like Eamon Collins smuggling in guns and bombs for attacks in the north.
I travel on this road with guns sitting beside me. I travel this road with bombs sitting beside me, in the passenger seat. And I travelled it with men who had completed operations sitting beside me with guns.
The IRA used a system of scouting. A scout car would meet an IRA unit in the relative safety of the Republic. The scout car went ahead, using its brake lights to signal trouble. In March 1982, Eamon Collins scouted over the border a Volkswagen car. The car was left in the Protestant town of Banbridge. It was packed with explosives. The town was full of shoppers and school children making their way home. The bomb was meant to destroy shops and businesses. The bomber, Len Hardy, was supposed to telephone a warning, but he preferred to get safely back across the border first. The warning call came too late. Across the road, in a jeweller's shop, was an 11-year-old schoolboy, Alan McCrum.
He was at his music lesson and I usually took him home. And he's waiting for his lift. And he came into the shop and was sitting in the chair. And I was taking this jewellery out of the jeweller's window and putting it away. And then he got up and he came towards me and he says, "Is that the last one?" I says, "Yes." And after this I says, "I can go down and go home." And just that was the bang. And the jewellery I had in my hand just scattered on the floor, and when I came back up into the shop, the wee boy was just lying on the floor. There's a piece of metal from my car just seemed to hit him in the back of the head.
How did a man like Eamon Collins become involved in the IRA campaign? Unlike many in the Republican movement, he was not born into it. Collins grew up in South Armagh, an area with strong Catholic and nationalist traditions. His family were well off. But even though they lived on the border, and sometimes made a living out of it, his family did not have strong Republican sympathies.
My father was a cattle dealer and stock breeder. He was a man full of humour, and he was a strong type of man, very independent. The difference in my mother and father was incredible. My mother was a devout Catholic, but my mother was a person who knew her history. She was a convent girl. She told me about the time that during the late 17th century, when the Catholic faith had nearly been obliterated from Ireland. And it was a knowledge of Irish history that had some respect and admiration for the martyrs of that faith.
In the mid-70s, Collins went to Queen's University, Belfast, to study law. He became actively involved in left-wing politics, but he was still not a supporter of the Provisional IRA. A visit home dramatically changed his views. An army patrol mistakenly thought they had detected traces of explosives in his father's car. Paratroopers raided the family home.
There was a soldier standing to the left of me in the shadows, and he was like guarding me. And at this particular time, I could hear a number of soldiers kicking in the front door, shouting, "Open the fucking door, open the fucking door." And my mother shouted, she was in bed, she was an invalid, and my mother hadn't actually managed to get out of bed. But they rushed into the house. They managed to kick the door in, up the stairs, and I could hear my mother screaming. And they were pulling her out of bed, in her nightdress. My mother. And suddenly, the soldier who was guarding me walked over, and he shoved into my mouth, cracking one of my front teeth, his SLR rifle. And he shoved it so far back in my mouth that I nearly choked on it. And he says, "I'd blow your brains out for twopence, you rotten Irish." At that particular moment, the absolute terror that I felt was beginning to subside. I was beginning to recollect myself. And I was beginning to say, these bastards have no right to do this to me. These people have no right to subject my father to this type of treatment. These people are dehumanizing us and degrading us as people. Our identities are being effectively erased as people in this moment in time. We are being denied basic human rights, and nobody gives a fuck. And nobody could do anything about it. But I started to feel, well, I'm going to start doing something about it.
Collins began demonstrating on behalf of the Republican cause. He joined the campaign in support of IRA prisoners who wanted to be treated as prisoners of war. Collins' republicanism was reinforced by Marxist ideology. He was encouraged by one of his law lecturers, David Ewins, who also went on Republican marches.
Dave, I learned, was from Richmond in England, and came from a very middle-class background. I was quite amazed to see that he had actually taken interviews from an IRA spokesman and used them in a revolutionary communist group publication called Hands Off Ireland, which he showed me, and which I was extremely impressed with. And we began to discuss in his study in Queen's, in his room, Marxism, the provisional struggle, was it a mass movement, and how I felt about it. And at that particular time, I was beginning to feel strongly about it.
Collins now saw the IRA as increasingly left-wing, with the potential to become a truly revolutionary movement. He crossed the border To Dundalk, the home of many IRA men wanted in the north, there was little threat of extradition. He met Len Hardy, the Banbridge bomber, who was to become his officer commanding. Collins was put to work with this man, Kieran McBride. McBride was an IRA intelligence officer who introduced Collins to the ways of the IRA.
He told me that in setting up an operation, what was needed to be done, that it wasn't just a matter of me giving him information. He said, you have got to put yourself in the role of how you would carry out this operation yourself. You're the man who's down there on the ground. You're the man that's closest to these targets. You're the man who knows how it should be done. I want to hear from you how volunteers can go in there, carry out the operation, effect an escape, and get their arms hid, etc. That's the completion of the operation. The operation doesn't end with the killing or the shooting of a target or the blowing up of a building. The operation ends with all volunteers safely back at base.
The new recruit could be very valuable to the IRA. After dropping out of university, Eamon Collins had joined the British Customs and Excise. Collins' first operation was an attack on his own customs office. It was a baptism of fire. A young IRA volunteer, Robert Carr, was to lose his life. An incendiary bomb went off prematurely. Robert Carr died a painful death several weeks later.
I had to go back into that building, that burned out part of the customs building. And I had to look at the bloodstains and the pieces of skin that he left of his body on those walls as he bumped to the left and the right. And they were circled 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All along the corridor, I had a smell, I never forget the smell of that burnt out building.
Collins knew when he joined the IRA he'd face death and destruction, but he was unprepared for this level of carnage.
This was a weakness of me, if you like. This was Eamon sitting feeling sorry for himself. This was Eamon sitting feeling, this isn't right. And the movement was saying, the movement is bigger than you. The movement is the next generation. The movement is the thousands of people who will benefit from the freedom that we're fighting for. And sacrifice has to be made. So make your sacrifice and stop complaining. And there's a bombed out building. And remember that. That's your symbol. Not Robert Carr. Not his widow. But the next operation.
Collins was soon making plans for murder. The target, Ivan Toombs, a part-time soldier in the Ulster Defence Regiment. He'd already been shot and wounded by the IRA. Toombs was a major in the UDR, but he was also a family man with 5 young children. The Toombs family tried to lead a normal life. But the children were aware of a threat from an early age.
We used to keep a gun in behind the door, and we weren't allowed to touch it. And we knew that it was this fearsome weapon that if used would kill a person, and that you weren't to go near it. It was dangerous.
The first thing in the morning, you would see fog going out and looking in underneath the car and such like. You weren't aware, because we were all very young, of the dangers, but we knew there was something there.
Reminders of the IRA campaign were all too frequent. This car bomb exploded near the family home.
Well, I can remember particularly the mornings whenever my husband was going to work, he sometimes took the children with him, and we would always have checked the car, and I would have stood at the window listening till I could hear in the car no longer, and just thank God that this morning there was nothing. He was safe.
As well as being a part-time soldier, Ivan Toombs had a full-time job in the Customs and Excise. He lived and worked in Warrenpoint. Ivan Toombs was cautious. He varied his route to work and arrived at different times. Once there, he should have been safe. But Eamon Collins had transferred to Warrenpoint. He was closing in.
The IRA goes into an area that's heavily policed. The IRA moves into an area that is heavily fortified. If you're going to go in and take on the enemy, and you're going to get out safely, well, then you've got to get in the period or the moment of least security presence. And you've got to get in and kill that person at the moment they are most vulnerable. And you've got to find, to do that, a routine. IRA can't be hanging around for moments watching out in targets. That's up to people like me. I was in that position. Nobody knew what I was. I was in the unique position to observe it up close. And that's what I wanted to do.
I enjoyed actually going down to customs with him. The people down there treated me really well, and they would have got pens and pieces of paper out and everything, and I would have sat and drew pictures or played in the typewriter, or, you know, just basically played about and enjoyed myself when I was down there while he did his work.
I looked into the eyes of his children. They were beautiful children, big brown eyes, his little daughters, and they seemed to be edgy and nervous. And I said, I'm close to having him killed. So close. And I'm going to deprive these children of their father. And I thought that at that moment, and I felt it. But I said, but we're going to do it.
Working on the inside, Collins was close to finalizing his plans. While pretending to photograph his workmates, he took a series of intelligence pictures for the gunman. He also recruited an accomplice, a young customs officer named Brendan McCackey, who was to confirm over the telephone that Ivan Toombs had arrived. All of this intelligence was passed on to the gunman, Kieran McBride.
I had suggested to Kieran that the way into that office was to go to the door, because there was security, ring a bell, have in his paper and in his hands export-import shipping documents, which I provided him with. I took out of the office and provided him with, and says, you go with these sheaf of documents, and once they see them, that's almost immediate entrance, because that's the normal thing that happens in that place. People come along with this. Happens every moment of the day. And it happened like that, like clockwork.
Ivan Toombs' children were at school when they heard the news.
Then he come up and he said, your father's been shot. Now, at this stage, you know, to me, when he said he'd been shot, he'd already been previously shot. I didn't know whether he had been killed or what state he was in, so I was told to make my way to the principal's office.
And I remember seeing my grandfather and my brother, Norman, with their heads bowed. And I sensed there was something wrong, that there was something happened in the family. At the time, I actually thought it was my mother, because she had been in hospital having an operation, so I thought, oh my goodness, something's happened to Mum.
The sister came in, and the minister, and they pulled the screens round me, and they told me that Ivan had been shot again. And I said, how is he? And they said, we really don't know. The news has just come through that he's been shot. I don't think anyone ever really told me he was dead.
I went to Toombs's funeral, which most of my colleagues had gone to.
But you didn't go to sympathise with the family?
Well, I didn't go to sympathise with his family. I wasn't interested in his family at that particular moment in time. I had gone for a number of reasons. One, a mark of respect for Toombs as a soldier who had lost his life in a conflict.
Who you'd murdered?
That's right. But as I considered, on an equal basis. We were soldiers, he was a soldier, I was his enemy, he was my enemy. Tough luck. That's the way it went.
Shortly after the murder, the police issued a photo fit of the gunman. He was never caught. Kieran McBride is now said to be at management level in the IRA. After the funeral, Collins went on holiday to New York. He was celebrating a successful start to his IRA career. IRA targets remained constant over the years of conflict. High on the list were British soldiers, but they were difficult to kill. The IRA had to avoid civilian casualties. Innocent deaths lost them support. Northern Ireland's police force, the RUC, were also well protected while on duty. So men like Eamon Collins looked for softer targets, off-duty members of the security forces or part-timers who could be tracked down to their homes.
I might go downtown at a particularly important part of the day. Morning, when people go to work. Lunchtime, when people change shifts, especially RUC men. And I would go down and watch out for cars that were going towards the RUC station. And bingo, I drove up the same road and you'll see one pulling in under the barrier. And quickly I'd memorize that number. I'm in the customs. I ring up vehicle license department. I say I'm interested in checking out the number of a particular vehicle. And it comes up belonging to a person. It doesn't say he's a policeman. I know he's a policeman, but it gives me his address. So I have a lot of information. I set about trying to find out points of reference, if you like, for people who were targets. You know, policemen, soldiers, people have to have bank accounts. And I had no hesitation in realising that through Inland Revenue, through the Housing Corporation, there would be information.
Informants were found whose jobs took them into Protestant areas without arousing suspicion. Somewhere here, a target might live.
I had some information coming from a television engineer, from another guy who was a maintenance officer who travelled around a van, repairing people's houses for the housing executive. He got an opportunity, maybe have been in a house repairing something and seen a policeman's uniform hanging in the wardrobe. A television engineer might have been in a house where he's seen a photograph of a soldier or a policeman on a mantelpiece. At the end of the day, those little things would end up being an operation. An execution, assassination, a kill.
Information came in that a bread delivery man was also a part-time police reservist. His name was Fred Morton.
Immediately, I'll look up the electoral list. Looked it up, looked for Fred Morton, got an address. And I decided to go jogging early in the morning. I'll leave the house. I jog the distance about 2 miles away. And I'm jogging down the road, 10 to 6, close to the area that he's going to come to. And 6 o'clock, 6:05, along comes my mother's pride bread van. There's two things I want to do. I want to look directly at that man, and I want to look directly at the number plate. I gotta look at his face, I gotta look at him, and that's it. And the rest is easy. Coming up to the junction in the road, he'd slow his van, past the van 20 yards before that, and hit him.
Again, you can live with that.
Absolutely. Can live with it. At this stage in my history, this stage in my IRA career, I can live with it. I've had a lot of operations under my belt. I've had a multiplicity of attempted murders, I've had a multiplicity of bombings, I've had a multiplicity of attempted shootings. What difference does it make? I've met so many IRA men, I've seen so many guns, I've been in possession of so many bombs. What's another killing?
The IRA hunger strike in 1981 marked the bitterest period of the conflict. The IRA were desperate to hit back. The leadership called for more operations and more recruits.
During the hunger strike, we had practically no recruits. And that meant that I had to go and expose myself. And I did. I went and exposed myself to a number of people and said, I'm in the IRA. I blew my cover, if you like. I took that risk and took that chance.
One of those Collins approached was his cousin Mickey. He would become one of the IRA's top gunmen. Mickey Collins has never been caught. He was an enthusiastic volunteer.
I had on my hands an eager soldier. And he wanted to act as soldiers act, and that's what soldiers do. They fight, and they engage in war. And I felt that the enthusiasm for this and the eagerness for this was not only a matter of fighting a war, but was also a matter of proving himself.
Mickey was eager to murder somebody.
He was eager to prove that he could do the business.
In 1982, Mickey was working in the housing office in Newry. Using the housing files, he located a target. Mickey insisted the target was a part-time soldier in the Ulster Defence Regiment. His name was Norman Hanna. Eamon Collins was not convinced that Norman Hanna was a military target.
I seen where he worked, and that was the first thing threw into my mind a doubt that he was in the UDR. So I asked Mickey to check up on the intelligence. He checked up on the intelligence. He had access to a public office file, which indicated the guy was no longer in the UDR over a period of 6 years. As far as I was concerned, he was not a target and should not be a target. That was a discipline and that was a morality, as far as I was concerned, was sacrosanct in the business, in the awful business that we were involved in. I had no illusion about the horror of that business, but there were certain disciplined army ground rules that I believed in applying rigidly, and that was one of them. He was not a target.
Collins was overruled by his IRA commanders. The murder would go ahead.
28-year-old Norman Hanna, who quit the UDR 6 years ago because his wife was frightened for his safety, had just kissed his 4-year-old daughter goodbye when the killers gunned him down outside Newry's PSV centre where he was a clerk. He was hit at least 6 times in the head and chest from point-blank range, and he died instantly. As his killers escaped on a motorbike, Mr. Hanna's hysterical wife and terrified daughter had to be comforted by his colleagues.
On the day the operation went ahead, I scouted the bike driver in. I arranged for the bike rider to be picked up and taken to my flat after the operation. and I arranged for meeting Mickey and picking up the guns. He was carrying 2 guns. He was carrying a 9mm Browning. He was carrying a .38 Smith & Wesson revolver, which with dum-dum bullets. Now, the moment that took place, my role and my position and my principles and my moral stand for what it was worth has been seriously invalidated. Why? Well, the night before the operation, I held the bag outside at 11 o'clock at night at a transformer, handed over the guns to Miguel. I said to him, this man is out of the UDR. You know it as regards the files. You've seen it. And I'm holding on to that bag. He's putting his hand on the other side of it, and there's a tug-of-war taking place. And I knew the moment that I let that bag go, that man's life was slipping down the drain. But he kept saying the man was seen at a checkpoint. The senior officer says the same. There's an operation that's ready to go. And I let it go. And I felt particularly guilty as a result of that operation. I had let that man's life slip through my fingers. And it was desperately wrong. Desperately.
Only 4 days later, another disaster. Collins scouted in the car bomb which exploded in Banbridge.
A car bomb left in the main street exploded, killing an 11-year-old boy. 15 people were taken to hospital. 2 of the injured are seriously ill. Police say it was a reckless, indiscriminate, no-warning bomb.
I've been 25 now, the 30th of May.
I felt the writing was on the wall. I felt for me it was the end. But it's like being a trained runner. It's like being a trained anything. Many years of skill and competence. Many moments and hours and weeks and months and years of doing something, of being involved in something, of something being your whole life. And suddenly, your body and your mind is telling you to stop, to call it a day. You can't stop.
The IRA was in trouble. Prosecutions using supergrasses were having devastating results. An IRA security unit was expanded in the hunt for informers. Just as he was having doubts about the campaign, Eamon Collins won promotion to the internal security unit. Known as the Nutting Squad, it was led by a veteran Republican, the late John Joe McGee. Second in command was Federico Scappaticci.
When I was recruited into the Nutting Squad, the people who I met were John Joe and Scap from Belfast, both senior Republicans in Northern Command. They're important people in the IRA. They hold rank. They have an amazing amount of information in their heads, a lot of experience, and because of their expertise and experience, they're picked to be members of the security unit. But the nickname or pseudonym for them is the Nutting Squad.
Why the Nutting Squad?
Because at the end of the day, if you've been involved and compromised and have been informant to the police, they shoot you through the nut. Dead.
An account of how the Nutting Squad operated was given by a police informer, Alexander Lynch, in 1991. Lynch had been rescued by the RUC before he could be executed. He'd been taken across West Belfast to Andersonstown and onto 124 Carrigart Avenue, then an IRA safe house. He was tied and blindfolded.
Scappaticci said, "You know my voice. You know who I am." He said he didn't give a shite because I wouldn't be telling anybody about it anyhow. Scabatici mentioned my wife. He asked me about her miscarriage. He said, what way would she react if she had to come down and identify you with no face? Because he would make sure I had no face. He poked me twice on the back of the head. He said I would wake up in a cattle shed in God's country, South Armagh. Nobody would be near enough to hear the screams. He said nobody ever came back up that road. I had no doubt I was going to be shot.
I felt this incredible nausea towards the whole thing, and abhorrence towards the people I was engaged with and involved with. I was getting promotion within the IRA. I was on the up in the IRA. And everything I ever believed in as regards revolutionary struggle, I was getting into a position where I could actually influence that. But it came at a time when I just couldn't face it anymore. Waking up each morning, when I was with young recruits, when I was with people who had been actively involved in training, and we seen prospective targets, and they'd said to me, here's a prospective target, I would nearly feel like vomiting. I couldn't see the point in killing policemen anymore. I couldn't even look at a soldier and say, well, is there any point or relevance in killing this person? And I couldn't listen to war news anymore. Because whenever we carried out an IRA operation, I was PR for the Army, and I would issue the statement. And I used to listen to my own statements on the media. I didn't want to hear it anymore. I didn't even put the radio on. I couldn't watch the news. I stopped reading newspapers.
.35 tonight, as Newry Police Station was crammed full of officers, the IRA unleashed a barrage of mortar shells hitting the restaurant area direct. Latest reports say that 9 police officers, including a woman, have been killed. The death toll is the largest suffered by the RUC since the Troubles began.
The attack on Newry Police Station went ahead without the assistance of Eamon Collins. Increasingly disillusioned with the IRA's campaign, he was less and less actively involved. But by now, Collins had been identified by police as an IRA suspect. Within hours of the attack, he was among the first to be arrested. Collins was held in Gough Barracks in Armagh. Under emergency laws, he faced 7 days questioning.
Interrogations lasted for roughly more than 2 hours each. There was very little break in between them. The interrogators varied. Some were particularly aggressive and threatened all sorts of violence. Some were methodical and worked through things and the information that they had from their informants, and there was no scarcity of them. And others were basing their approach on evangelical Protestantism, which was a right pain in the arse. And one guy in particular spent certainly the 5 days when I didn't speak, shouting into my ear, close up, every single day.
Collins had been trained in IRA anti-interrogation techniques. He remained silent, lying on the floor when pressure was intense. For 5 days, he said nothing. He complained of physical abuse. He said police offered him deals and threatened to arrest his wife and his brother.
And then they went through various stages of clever blackmail and putting the pressure on even further. That they didn't believe that I couldn't be involved in the mortar attack. They used that again and again and again. And I was a broken, exhausted man. I was absolutely worn out, and that some of the things that they were saying were having an effect. I had had enough of it.
After 5 days, Eamon Collins cracked. He made statement after statement to police, naming almost 50 IRA men. Dozens were arrested. He named Kieran McBride as the man who shot dead Ivan Toombs. He named Len Hardy as the Banbridge bomber. He named Federico Scappaticci and John Joe McGee. And he said cousin Mickey was the gunman in a number of murders. The RUC treated Collins as another supergrass. Collins told them all about IRA operations on the border, and then he sprang a surprise. Queen's University had been the scene of a notorious IRA attack. It clearly involved very high-grade intelligence. Lord Lowry, Northern Ireland's Lord Chief Justice, had visited Queen's under strict security.
Lord Lowry had just arrived at Queen's University Common Room for a private luncheon before delivering a lecture. Gunmen lying in wait in an empty house next door opened fire. But the 5 shots fired through a bedroom window missed Lord Lowry and instead hit a university professor who was leaving the building.
The question was, who had leaked the exact details of the visit? Whoever it was, the attack had almost killed Northern Ireland's top judge. There was a suspect. Eamon Collins' former law lecturer was still teaching at the university. The Englishman and Marxist, David Ewins.
He was a loner, secretive, a person who was known to have extreme left-wing political views. He was one of the ones who was present waiting for the lunch with Lord Lowry. And inevitably after the attack on Lord Lowry, people asked themselves, and I remember colleagues saying, how could they have known that he was going to be there outside the common room at that time? It must have been a leak coming from one of the people involved, and we looked at the people involved, and I remember colleagues saying, you know, is it possible that it could have been him?
In statements to the police, later produced as evidence in court at his own trial, Eamon Collins named David Ewins as the man whose information led to the attack on Lord Lowry. David Ewins had known in advance about the judge's visit. Collins and Ewins had remained close friends. When Collins was married, one of the guests was David Ewins. Lord Lowry's visit to the university was only weeks away.
Dave came across, I sat down beside him, and he said to me, would the IRA like to take out Lord Lowry, the Lord Chief Justice? I said, where's this information coming from? He said, I've got it. He's coming on to visit, to give a lecture, and quite soon. And I said, this is tremendous.
Right up until his arrest, Collins stayed in touch with David Ewins. In 1984, Ewins went on holiday with Eamon Collins and his wife to Moscow.
Why wasn't Ewins arrested?
Well, as part of the arrangement that the police were making with me, I said that I wouldn't cooperate with them in any way whatsoever if Dave was arrested. Dave was a friend of mine and had been for many years, and I didn't want him touched.
And he wasn't touched?
He wasn't.
What happened to him after you were arrested?
He left Queen's in a hurry.
Eamon Collins refused to help Network First to find his old friend. We eventually tracked him down in Dublin, where he still teaches law at a private college. David Ewins declined to be interviewed on camera. Later, through his lawyer, he said he was astounded and deeply shocked by the allegations. He would sue if they were repeated on television. Back in Belfast in 1985, Eamon Collins was held on remand in Crumlin Road Prison. He was charged with over 50 terrorist offences, including 5 murders. But would he still give evidence against fellow IRA men?
It was such a psychological fuck-up that it's very hard when you break, and when you get to that stage, to find your way back. It's practically impossible. And the journey back from that was difficult. But I managed it. And I managed it as soon as my brother walked through the door and got visit me. He said to me, if you retract, everything will be forgiven. You go back to your friends, they're waiting for you with open arms. And no matter what happens, they know what you've been through. They know what you've experienced. They'll forgive you. Just retract. And I did.
While most of the IRA men he'd named walked free, Collins faced trial. In court, he argued that his statements had been obtained by the police through ill treatment and that they should not be allowed in evidence. Without them, there was no case against him. The judge decided Collins' confession might well be true, but he wasn't certain the police had used entirely proper methods to obtain it. The statements were ruled inadmissible, and Collins walked free. Collins had escaped British justice, and he cannot now be tried again. The IRA had already given him an amnesty, but he'd done considerable damage to the secret army, and many in the IRA wanted him dead. Back home in Newry, Collins was interrogated by the nutting squad and left to wait for their verdict.
Eamon Collins, the IRA hereby gives you 7 days' notice from a date in this letter to leave the occupied 6 counties. If you wish to remain in Ireland, you must stay south of Drogheda. Our reasons for putting you out of the occupied 6 counties are 1. Security. 2. Endangering the lives of volunteers. 3. Jeopardising IRA activity in the 6 counties. We will be issuing a public statement that you will be executed at our convenience as soon as the 7 days have run out. Signed, P. O'Neill. That's what I got after giving 8 years of my life to the IRA.
The IRA forced Collins into exile, leaving his wife and family behind.
Hi, Sean. See you again. All right. Don't be long. Don't be worried about me now. Okay. See you, Tierna. See you, Bernie.
The IRA publicly denounced Collins as an informer, a stigma never forgotten in nationalist Ireland. Collins was determined that one day he would have his say.
This story, it's been 10 years in the telling, and it's taken until now to do it. The ceasefire and the peace process has made that possible. And I consider it to be an important record, not only for me and for my family, but also for this present generation and future generations, so that they will know the reality behind, the unromantic reality, if you like, the unheroic reality of what it was like to be involved in a campaign for a considerable period of time. The ceasefire is a wonderful thing. I think that the nationalist people will only gain from the ceasefire, and I think the gains will become more obvious as time goes by. And I have no doubt that at some stage I will live and return to my home, and I will live a normal life, as will everybody. There will be no real peace until everybody's able to do that.
In the years since his release, Eamon Collins has had nothing to do with political violence. He finished a degree in education and has worked with difficult children. But the wreckage remains from his time as an active IRA man. Prince Andrew recently unveiled a memorial to members of the Ulster Defence Regiment killed by the IRA. Among the hundreds of bereaved relatives, the family of Ivan Toombs.
I don't want to mouth platitudes to say I'm sorry for what happened. I was sorry the day those events took place. There's nothing much more I can say to those people. I just hope that as the years go on, that their pain of the people that they love and lost as a result of me and people like me is minimalized. We all suffered. Every person in the community suffered. We all lost people close to us and loved ones and people we thought a lot of. They suffered, I suffered. I don't want to insult them in any way. I don't want to make their pain any worse than what it has been. I'm sorry for what took place. I can't restore that person to them. So there's nothing very much more that I can say except that I'm able to live with it.
On August the 31st, 1994, the IRA declared a ceasefire. The search for a lasting peace is underway. The sense of loss continues.